Absolutely. First off, I'd really like to thank y'all for getting together here at a time when our national politics are perhaps more divisive than ever, to get together, to share ideas, to get inspiration that you can bring back to communities of human scale. And those are towns, cities, counties, where we can actually see an impact that our involvement and that our impact on policy can make in a very direct and firsthand manner. So thank you for showing up. And with that, I'm really excited to talk both about Deschutes Brewery, about craft beer, about what craft beer means to communities across the United States, and get into it. And I will say, these lights are very bright, so I can't see you really, really well, but this is meant to be iterative. This does not need to be me up here speaking. I would rather have it be discourse. So if along the way you find something that is interesting, piques your interest, you want to go further, just point at me or wave or something and we can talk about it, just like that. So with that, we'll go on to the next slide briefly, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So I've been with our team at Deschutes Brewery for about 6.5 years in a finance capacity, and before that, I came from the murky and scary world of private equity. But I'll have you know, prior to that, I worked with a political think tank in Central and Eastern Europe, working on programs that helped galvanize what are relatively fresh new democracies there. And prior to that, and another interesting, I think Sarah brought this up a little earlier, I worked for a Native American community in Arizona to create a community development financial institution. So a lot of these issues really do resonate with me very personally. I'm a political science guy by training before finding the dark side of economics and finance. So interesting stuff. So moving on to the next slide, I will share a little bit about Deschutes Brewery. So we were founded in 1988, and I'll go deeper into our founding, why and how, and what Bend, Oregon, the community that we're from, was like at that point in time. But we've always been family and employee-owned. So ESOPs were mentioned a little bit earlier, and I'm actually going to delve deeper into that employee ownership model a little further in this presentation, but that's something that we take tremendous pride in and is very important to the way we do business and the way that we view distributing wealth amongst a broader base and getting more people involved in the capital base and creating wealth for more than just a small group. I think this is really important to what we do. So on the next slide, and the next slide after that, we'll get to talk a little bit about the history of the public house in America, because our founding was based not so much on beer or craft beer. In 1988, craft beer was like barely a thing, really. If you told somebody today about some fruited mango IPA, they would look at you and be like, this is absolute insanity. But here we are, with a great diversity of damn tasty beer, and we should be thankful for that. But let's go back to colonial times for just a second, because the core of who we are and why we started was not about beer so much as it was about the idea of bringing people together. And I think beer is a very nice vehicle to kind of lubricate ideas and get people comfortable talking to each other and maybe talking about difficult topics. And I will say, our owner and founder, Gary Fish, his whole mission when he founded us in 1988 was, I want to create a place where people can come together, where socioeconomic bounds and classes and all this falls by the wayside. And I won't say this is untrue with other types of ethanol, like wine or distillates, but beer really is an equalizer. You could be the president of the United States drinking a beer next to whoever else drinking a beer, and you're all drinking beers, and it's like everybody's on the same level. At least that's my experience, especially after more than one beer. But so the public house in colonial America served very much this purpose. It was the community clearinghouse. Back at this point in time, and I'm talking 1685 forward, this is where mail was delivered. All international communications, letters, everything ran through the public house. And if we go further, does anyone recognize this particular public house, by the way? It's actually quite storied. This is the Tun in Philadelphia, or was the Tun. It has long since been scraped to the ground. But this is actually where the Freemasons were formed in the United States. It's also where the U.S. Marine Corps was formed, for any former Marines in the room, or current Marines. But this pub, like the Green Dragon in Boston as well, where Thomas Paine's ideals, where Thomas Jefferson's ideals were spread, and really where the American Revolution was seated was at a tavern, right? So I mean, the idea of the Boston Tea Party, if you were sober, would be pretty crazy. Get a couple pints in you, and maybe that evolves into something more revolutionary, and that's exactly what happened. So now I'll fast forward to this next slide that shows our pub in 1988. And this was really unique. So Gary Fish, our owner and founder, decided, went all over the western United States looking for a good location to put a pub. And he settled on Bend, Oregon. Now, this is going to be interesting because I think there are actually some commonalities with Roanoke. At the time, maybe lesser today, but at the time Bend was founded, Bend was a mono-industry town. There was only one industry, and it was forest products. So it was a mill town, hugely industrial. And in the late 70s, early 80s, a lot of environmental regulation pivoted, shifted, and basically that timber industry, the forest products industry, completely collapsed in a large part of Oregon. And Bend was horrendously impacted. The unemployment rate went north of 25%. There was really no other industry to kind of pick up the slack. There was potential because Bend's in this beautiful place surrounded by national forest, hundreds and hundreds of miles of national forest in the Cascade Mountains, and there's a ski mountain and all kinds of cool stuff, but really that was it. So Gary, who at the time I think was extremely visionary, says, hey, let's build this place in Bend, Oregon. There's potential here. There will be resurgence. People are in to put in the effort to build something really, really cool here. And at the time, downtown, which is 2 streets, still 2 streets today, was all boarded up, and literally there was this pub, which is in a former law office. I wish I could say all that like cool brick facade was like real tavern house kind of brick. Behind it's like drywall and an old law office, which, hey, but we're still there, we're still there. And what's cool is it evolved into this true like community clearinghouse. And whether you're a member of the Bend community or you're just in visiting, it seems like everybody passes through the pub. It's family friendly. It's about anyone and everyone being welcome, that sense of welcomeness and that fabric of community. And that's how we started. So it's pretty crazy where we've come from then, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But, I mean, that's the root of us. So the next slide, please. So I just want to go over our core values, emphasizing one in particular. A lot of these I think you would find to be common with a lot of other enterprises. Things like honoring our customers. In the beer industry, delivering quality is of the utmost importance. Working as a team, doing our best and next time doing it better, so that dedication to continuous improvement that spans not only what we do as an industrial enterprise or as a pub, but also to how we engage with our community and how much impact we can have with our community. So the value that I really wanted to emphasize, though, is building a healthier society. And our core values have shifted and evolved over time. Not frequently, because I think you have to be very circumspect when you change something that is at your core. So almost every one of these has changed in one way or another, with the exception of build a healthier society. And that has always been at the core of who we are. So I mentioned the idea of bringing people together, but it also extends into how we manufacture, the practices we put in place to save energy, to reuse grain, to do things down the supply chain which are beneficial to the environment, but also how we engage with our community. And I'll talk a little more about that later. I do want, though, to talk a little about the enterprise just to give you a sense of scale also. So, of course, this is always a cool one, too. Celebrate the culture of beer. That's easy to do. The other ones can be more challenging. So this is our public house. To give you a sense of scale, it's a 10-barrel batch system. 10 barrels is 31 gallons. Once you start hearing from brewery people, you're going to hear this a lot. Barrels, barrels this, barrels that. 31 gallons or 13.78 24-bottle, 12-ounce bottle cases, just for scale. Very small. That's the point. Next slide, please. And so the purpose of our pub, and I already alluded to it a little bit earlier, was the idea that good beer brings people together. It breaks down barriers. It allows people to talk. And the fact that it is an extremely family-friendly environment, anyone is welcome, really helps. But it's amazing to me to see the rigor and the kind of energy that the discourse that happens at the bar. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. And this is like political discourse. It's discourse about how we should be doing things in the community, both at the immediate Bend level, the Oregon level, and the national level. And it's all different opinions. And they're shared in this kind of safe environment where even if you're at radically different ends, you come together and you can have this meaningful kind of discourse. And to me, that is absolutely critical to our democracy. It's to talk to other people with different points of view and be able to communicate, learn, and empathize and see why and how people have come to believe what they believe or think certain policy is a way to go or not the way to go. And I think that's really, really important. So that's part of it. But beyond just doing this for our patrons, we also host almost every political debate of scale that we can accommodate, we host. So it doesn't matter what party. I mean, extending well beyond the bipartisan framework, it could be other parties, independent parties. Almost everything happens at the pub. And to me, that's extremely exciting. So you'll see not just political debates when folks are running for office, but also on policy issues. Whenever there's a forum or an open house or just a discussion about anything, this could be things like instituting, for example, a gas tax for road maintenance. The forum for that discussion is not in the chambers of City Hall. It's not in some, private political club. It's at the pub. And to me, that's a really, really cool thing. And it's not, and I will say it's not just us. It's not just us. This is craft beer in general. And when you see all these independent, small breweries, it's not every craft brewery. Some espouse a different kind of worldview. But a lot do the same thing. And this is why I think, as a nation, we're lucky to be at this point in our history when beer has become an equalizer and it's spread across the country. You're looking at over 2,500 craft brewers, brew houses, pubs, places where people can come together that are not owned by foreign multinationals, that are locally, family, or employee-owned, and they can talk over things. And that's really, I think, pretty critical. So next slide, please. I do want to talk about our production brewery, though, because I've talked about our history as a pub. It is important to understand that step, how we made that leap from a pub into an actual manufacturer of scale in a very bootstrapped way without accepting capital from anyone else ex the bank, which still technically owns us in many ways, whereby we have a lot of debt. But the production brewery, the way that started was folks from Portland, Seattle, the surrounding area would come to ski in Mount Bachelor, very much in line with our founder's vision that eventually people would come to Bend for its beauty rather than its timber milling capacity, and they did. And they came and they tasted the beer, and we had very radical beers at the time. One of the first beers we ever made was a porter. It's a dark beer, a sweeter black beer, very balanced, very accessible. But at the time, dark beers there was Guinness, and that was basically it. Which is ironic, because in colonial times, porter, George Washington, in fact, had one of the most famous porter recipes, was all the rage. But fast forward a couple hundred years, and it had gone out of vogue. At any rate, so porter was really, really popular. Folks from Seattle, Portland, they asked for it, and we put kegs on the back of recycled cardboard trucks and sent them over. We would not do that today from a quality control standpoint. I just want that to be clear. This was a long time ago. Sent them over to Portland, sent them over to Seattle. Fans were super excited about the beer. And then the city of Bend approached us and said, hey, you guys are pursuing industrial production in a restaurant zone space. We're going to shut you down. Bear in mind, unemployment rate north of 20%, economy not exactly firing on all cylinders. Here's a nascent manufacturer that's making progress, that's growing. At any rate, Gary basically said, all right, fine, you want to shut us down, we'll just build a brewery. So they went to the industrial park that had 0 tenants at the time, and on a very small plot, put a very small brewery on less than 3 acres. Now, to put it in perspective, today we're on 17.49 acres. That was that was excessively precise. And that's the facility now in Bend. So we go from this time when we were producing a couple thousand barrels to where we're at today. Next slide, please. And then we also have what we founded in 2008, which is the idea of continuing the same idea of a community clearinghouse in Portland, our pub in Portland. Has anyone been to the pub in Portland? Awesome. Fantastic. Figure somebody would have. Next slide, please. So when I talked about scale, I do want to give you a sense of where we're at. We've grown every year since our founding in '88 from a mere 714 barrels to what we ended last year, which was 345,000 barrels. We'll be about 375,000 barrels today. Why this is important, just to understand how our values have stayed consistent as we have grown. We went from having 7 employees at the time to 540 co-owners today, since we went employee-owned. Next slide, please. And this is where we distribute. So 28 states plus the district. We also export to Canada, New Zealand, Singapore, Thailand, Hong Kong, and that's sufficient. We're the number one U.S. craft beer in British Columbia, actually. It's pretty amazing. Canadians are major fans. And our future facility is coming here in Roanoke, which is awesome. And if I haven't totally blown my time, which I might have, I can tell you a little bit about how we made that decision at the end, or you can stick around and I can tell you about it. Next slide, please. We're going to go through this fast just to show you kind of the breadth of style. That is part of what makes us unique. brewing prior to craft beer taking off was pretty much, here's yellow fizzy beer, and this is what you get. And we have a lot of different really interesting recipes. So next slide here. Next slide. I want to highlight this beer just in particular because it's also how we tie in many ways with art. Art is a big part of who we are. We have a lot of art around the brewery, but this is cool. This is our festive winter warmer ale called Jubal Ale. And it's interesting because we commission a different Pacific Northwest artist every year. We look at their portfolio and we say, hey, go create some art for the label. And that is all the guidance they get. So you have no idea what it's going to be, really. But that's something we do that's cool. And that is actually, shockingly, that is a collage of every other former year's label, which is insane. If you see the original piece, it's quite beautiful and intricate. Next slide, please. These are really hoppy beers. Next slide, please. I'm just trying to keep us going fast. So as was mentioned earlier, the environment that we operate in today, the competitive environment amongst firms, amongst companies, tends to be very competitive. And we're lucky that in our category, in craft beer, that competition is just not there, at least not yet. It is extremely collaborative because for the last many, many years, as craft beer has grown to 20% of US market share, it's been taking share from multinational brewers. So those in craft are very keen to collaborate, explore new recipes, explore new ideas, draw from sense of place in recipe design and development, and we do a lot of collaboration. So there's some interesting ones, but just to highlight actually something that's a little off the beaten path, that beer that you see in the middle, Zarabanda, was actually a collaboration with a chef, Jose Andreas. If you've happened to go through DC, perhaps you've been to, his beer is really, or his food is really, really good. So, but we try to do collaborations that are really different, and again, there's some that have been really based on sense of place, where our brewers have literally walked through the woods finding native ingredients that could go in beer, and it's resulted in some really interesting stuff. So, next slide, please. Ooh, these are great. I'm not going to have time to talk about them. But this is our Reserve series. Typically, these are barrel-aged, very innovative recipes, typically a little higher on the ABV side, maybe 11 to 13%, so a lot of exciting things going on. Not just yeast acting as the only microorganism to create flavor, but there's other wild microorganisms that create really cool flavors. So, next slide, please. All right, now we get to some of the crux, the real material here. I want to talk a little bit about employee ownership, and we'll go to the next slide just so I can tee up some of the things of how we did what we did and why we did what we did. So for the last 10 years, we've been entirely open book with our management style. And this is a really cool way of doing things in that all of our financial results, down to the most small detail, we share with our entire co-owner base. Everything. Hold individual wages, because there's a fair amount of sensitivity around that. But every other detail about how we operate, what our profitability is, what our debt is like, all those details are shared. And if anyone wants to go into real immense kind of analysis of this, and we have some co-owners that enjoy that, all they have to do is come talk to me and we'll break it down together. So not only do we share all that information, but we get together quarterly and work through it as a team so everybody understands how their part in value creation actually helps build the business and help create something that's sustainable. So we started with that, and our team already had this tremendous sense of pride in ownership in what we do, in creating the beers and everything that we do, and interacting with our fans at the pub. So going to an ESOP was actually a really logical extension. So it takes that mentality, and you'll probably see that it was one of our core values is own it. And that wasn't something that came from our board or our team or even the strategic planning team. That actually came from our co-owner base. They're like, we need a value that recognizes ownership. And we said, go figure out what it should be. And they came back with own it. Normally it comes with an exclamation mark, which I like, because it's like own it, everything. And not just the financial economic upside that comes with the actual employee ownership, but owning one's career path, owning our actions. It ties into accountability, responsibility, and I think it's really core to who we are. So that's pretty cool. But our decision to go ESOP, there we go. Our decision to go ESOP was actually in December of 2012, and you'll see that a lot of breweries at the time were making deals with foreign multinationals, selling to strategic buyers, selling to financial buyers, and we absolutely did not want to do that. So this is pretty interesting. Our owner and founder, Gary, didn't sell a single share to the ESOP. It was only his non-active family members, and they didn't sell it because they needed liquidity. They were fine. But what they saw was the momentum that was happening in the company, and they wanted to take those values that we had for ownership, for taking pride in what we do, and more directly convey the economic benefit of that activity to our employee base, now our co-owners. So very, very cool thing. Little thing about employee ownership in America, this was mentioned a little bit earlier, but ESOPs as a whole there are about 5,500 ESOPs in the United States. About 1.6 million citizens of the United States work for an ESOP. Now, if you put that in context of the total labor market, that's about 0.06%. No, 0.6%, sorry. Your decimals are going everywhere here. 0.6% of the whole U.S. So, I mean, it's pretty incredible. You're talking about $115 billion in assets. But when you look at the broader economy, employee ownership is actually shockingly rare. Even though it does touch a broad swath of people, when you compare it to the total labor market, it's a pretty rare thing. So a little about ESOPs. I wish I could go in great depth. If you're interested in this, I know a lot about it, and I'm happy to share that. Just grab me afterward. But ESOPs, what they are is they're employee stock ownership programs. And this is like a 401k program. It is a retirement plan. It is governed by ERISA, the same framework of the Department of Labor that governs a 401k. And it's pretty unique in that there are some governance kind of changes that happen when you're an ESOP. It is a trust, which is in and of itself unique. But what's really cool about it is seeing the performance of ESOP companies in aggregate versus non-ESOP companies. If you compare the economy as a whole to just every ESOP company that exists, the ESOP company's growth rate and wealth creation for all the participants exceeds that of the economy of a whole by an order of magnitude. It's actually quite amazing. So I want to give like a bigger pitch for ESOPs, but I don't have time. But if you want to talk about it, I would love to, so come find me afterward. Next slide. Now I'd like to talk a little more about how we engage the community in a different way. And this is how we partner with nonprofits and how we partner with those in the community that are really making a difference, having a positive impact, or have ideas that could have a positive impact. So something that's cool is that from 1988 and our founding, we've actually donated $1 per barrel of beer that we sell to nonprofits every year. So for every barrel of beer we sell in a year, we donate $1 to nonprofits. Now in 1988, when that was 714 barrels or $714, the impact may not have been as great as it is today. But today, as we clock close to 375,000 barrels, that's actually a really significant impact. And we've held to that. But the dollar value is not what I think is important. It's more the process by which we go about allocating that capital and figuring out who to partner with that's going to have really big impact. And our partnership, by the way, goes well beyond just dollars. In the organizations that we support, we usually also lend our own kind of sweat equity to help the mission. Most of us volunteer. We usually volunteer as a team, and it's usually with the organizations that we've decided to partner with. But what's cool is how we select these organizations. So we have a totally separate elected community involvement team that's elected by peers at the brewery. Senior staff, the board, nobody has a say in that. It's purely your fellow co-owner. You run on a platform, you go for election, you get voted in, and you, along with the other members of the team, hear from a range of different nonprofits, learn about what their efforts are in their community, do quite a bit of due diligence. It's actually really impressive the amount of effort that goes into selecting who we partner with, and then the funds are allocated by that committee. So it's cool that that's not coming from management, that is coming truly organically from people that are voted into that position. So pretty cool. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the insanity, and for those in Roanoke that have seen this, you know what this is. I just wanted to talk about this because it is pretty interesting. What that little house-looking thing there was 2 years ago that was just a crazy idea, and today it's a reality. We had a couple members of our marketing team come to us and say, hey, we have this idea. We started as a pub, and the idea is bringing people together and creating a healthier society, more robust communities. How can we do that outside of Bend, outside of Portland where we have pubs? I mean, we distribute to 28 states. How can we engage in a more experiential, direct way with these communities? And they're like, well, we should just bring the pub to the people. That's what they came and said to me, bring the pub to the people. And I'm like, well, what does that entail exactly? What does that mean? And then boom, unfolds this huge, they'd already done like an entire like prototype mock-up, which was awesome, unfolds this huge paper, and it's this giant pub, and they're like, we're gonna make a pub made out of reclaimed oak and steel from the old industry in Oregon, and then we're gonna take it around all these different cities, and we'll host these events, and we'll partner with nonprofits who will be volunteers, and then we'll take all the proceeds and give it to the nonprofit. And I was like, that sounds consistent with our mission, but out of curiosity, how much is this going to cost? And they're like, bear in mind, my role is finance. These are like some of the questions I have to ask. And they're like, well, it's going to cost, about $500,000. And I was like, wow, just to build it, not to operate it. And I was like, well, we're crazy, and sometimes crazy just works, so let's do it. And we in Bend, we built this thing with local contractors. They constructed this entire thing that travels around the country. And on the next slide, we'll talk about kind of where it goes. Oh, it went automatically to like the big number. That was going to be an animation, but don't worry about it. So this was last year. This was our first year in operation. Let me just say, this was like a complete test. It is like running a rock show. None of us knew what we were doing. We did not know what we were getting into. Taking something from city to city that fits in a truck and trying to build it in the 10 hours that a street is closed down, because we take over a street in the middle of cities typically, it was pretty amazing. So we hit some fairly large cities: Sacramento, Bend, Denver, Minneapolis, Chicago, Cleveland, Philly. That was the first year we did it. But I'll say this, the first event we did was Bend, and we raised $7,500. The last event we did that year was Sacramento, and we raised $99,000. I'm just going to round up. That was $100,000. But what's nuts about it is when we contemplated this platform, we're like, well, what would be success if we did this? We're like, well, a lot of people would come out, volunteers from the nonprofits would come out, folks that came would learn about the missions from these different nonprofits, and if we raised $25,000 in 8 hours, that would be successful. That would be a good. When we started raising like $100,000 in 8 hours, we're like, I think we're onto something here. So it's been pretty amazing. But this is in combination with the $1 a barrel that we do. So that kind of multiplies our giving effort basically by 2. And then the next slide, this was cool because right there, this gentleman, the last to the right, if you're looking at it, from your way, this was his idea. And he was literally a tour guide at our facility before coming up with some of this idea, going around with our traveling beer barrel Woody, and then invented this great idea, and it won Brewbound, which is an industry publication that looks at like all the philanthropic efforts that different breweries are trying in a year, and it won Cause of the Year for having great efficacy, being way more effective than we could have ever imagined. Next slide. And this is where we went this year, but I really want to highlight one particular city, which is where we're all at, Roanoke, because thank you, Roanoke, because the street pub in Roanoke was the biggest, most well-attended street pub that we have ever had in the history of the brewery. Bear in mind, Roanoke Valley, total population somewhere around 300,000. Look at the other cities we were in. Chicago, Philadelphia, it's kind of small towns over there. Roanoke blew it away. So again, talk about bringing community together. That was you guys coming together. So that was an awesome, awesome sight to see. And that was, we were all sitting there, our whole team. We had about 60 people here, and we were like, man, we are so glad we're coming to Roanoke, because it was just, the enthusiasm was incredible. So next slide. How am I doing on time? Good, I have time? Okay, good, because I would like, this is kind of an adjunct to the rest of it. I thought a little bit about, how we are engaged in community, but I also wanted to share how we came to call the Roanoke Valley our home and the kind of process there, because it was very much centered on match with community. And I think it's interesting. There's some business factors too, and I want to put those up there and try to give you a overarching picture of how we as a team and our co-owners made this decision. So next slide, please. What we did to start this process first, and this is actually crazy when I rethink what we did, we engaged a consultancy to look at different sites, basically across the mid-Atlantic and southeastern United States. And initially we located 100 sites, and we toured 50 sites in more than 40 communities. And I remember that. So when people are like, I'm traveling and I woke up in a hotel and I didn't know where I was, and you're like, yeah, whatever. I can say like literally that happened. There's not braggadocio. That literally happened. I'm like, I have no idea what city I'm in right now. But we visited 40 great communities, met a lot of very enthusiastic people, but in a couple slides, I'm going to tell you how we came to choose Roanoke and why. Next slide, please. So this whole idea of going east in the first place, I should tell you why we did that. In Bend, we are landlocked. We can't expand our brewery beyond really 500,000 barrels of capacity. Now, you saw that we were in 28 states, and we do have aspirations to be able to provide damn tasty beer to the entire American populace, not just the 28 states that we're in. And we looked at this map in our strategic planning team. Cool thing here, too. The way we do strategic planning, it's our whole senior management team, subject matter experts from different areas like brewing, packaging, et cetera, but then also elected members that represent the co-owner base at large from each area within the brewery. So it's both an elected body as well as those that are part of senior management and other managers. So our strategic planning process is nuts. We have 23 people in the room. Consensus with 23 people. It's an awesome thing, but it's very democratically run. So this is what we put up. This is population density in the US, and we're like, wow. Most of the U.S. that is the most population-dense part of the U.S. we are not in, and we will never be able to fulfill from Bend for a variety of reasons. One, it's hard to build out there. Two, it makes very little sense to ship basically a half a bottle of diesel with your bottle of beer, because that's approximately what it takes. And that's not a very green thing to do, and that is important to us. So next slide. So we looked at this kind of area with these big green dots, and they're scaled to be where we thought we would be sending the most beer. And these two kind of crazy, I don't know what shapes those would be, interesting shapes, that's what they are. Those interesting shapes represent the areas where we thought, hey, logistically, this would make the most sense for us to fulfill this demand, basically Kansas East. Next slide. And then we did a bunch of stuff. So the way that we made this decision was not just the team that went and did site selection. We actually engaged a separate team called the Culture Club. And dude, Boy George is going to nail him for that at some point in time. But this is pretty cool. We engaged this team called the Culture Club, which were folks, co-owners from throughout the company, just those that really embody the culture, those that understand it. And the purpose of that was multifold. One, it was to define our culture as it is present state, and set some direction for where we want to go culturally. But then, the kind of tertiary and very important part is, how do we take our culture and transfer the core tenets of that to our second location? So they were part of the team that came to evaluate all the different sites that we selected. And they came to the final 4 sites, Roanoke obviously being one. And we assess stuff on a variety of concerns. This is like business concerns, right? Your typical stuff. In the brewery business, water quality, water quantity, obviously important base ingredient. Site potential, site risk, these are all important things. The business stuff, though, is not what I want to emphasize. Next slide, please. Because almost every site that we looked at, and every community that we looked at, when we got down to those 4 finalists, they all hit those things. All your business stuff was fulfilled, right? So this is how we really ultimately made the decision. And they're weighted. This was crazy. It spit out like a giant algorithmic number, which I don't know is a good idea or bad idea, but it made it seem like quantified, right? Which, if you're a geek like myself, that somehow adds credibility to things. So, but the weighting was important. So number 1, and this wasn't the highest weighted, but it was an on-site fun factor. Could we make the brewery not just a manufacturing facility, but somewhere where the community could come and have fun? We have the idea of this like cyclocross racing thing, which is very much in vogue at the brewery at the moment. I'm a very bad racer, last place every race I've ever done. Impact on the community, this was of the utmost importance. When the team was making the decision, it was, can we partner with a community where we'll have a reciprocally positive impact? You know, we'll get a lot from the community in terms of energy that is going to help us execute successfully, and the community can expect a lot from us in terms of engagement and hopefully just building a positive energy. Outdoor recreation, schools, vibrant community, these were all part of the decision factor. And ultimately, it's this part of this nerdy spreadsheet that ended up making the decision, not the business concerns part. And that was what was funny. And I think what was really cool, too, is when we sat down as a team to make the decision, and there's 11 people around the table, it was unanimously for Roanoke, without a stutter from anybody. So pretty cool, pretty cool. Next slide, please. And why did that happen in that way? I'll say, because It was the community rallying together to show support, and the fact that there was this galvanized sense of support from the community for us to call this our home and to become part of the community, being welcomed, that was absolutely huge to us. And this was the Deschutes to Roanoke campaign. There were also adult big wheels involved. That might have involved me, but I didn't put the picture of me because I figured someone could take a picture of that and then it'd be on social media and it'd be a mess. So, anyway, next slide, please. And this is the announcement, just to recap what was done. I look very overly excited, but I was really, really excited. It was a long time coming. And then next slide. Just to show you the site, absolutely stunning 50-acre greenfield, beautiful site in the Roanoke Center for Industry and Technology. And coming to this site selection with something so close to downtown, with a view of the mountains, with a view of Mill Mountain and the Star, absolutely incredible. And partnering with the city and with economic development to make this happen was just so awesome. And the idea that the Greenway, Tinker Creek is down. Yeah, thank you. That was perfect timing. Tinker Creek is down here. The blue thing would be water. The idea that the Greenway will eventually extend there and connect and create this really cool stop along the way is super exciting for us. And the objective is that we create something that's experientially really engaging and fun to go to and fun to be a part of. So that's a site layout. You won't be able to see any of it, but it just shows that a brewery can fit there. That's a big brewery. Bear in mind, that's 50 acres. It's a lot of square foot under roof. Next slide, please. And there's the ugliest drawing ever from our German friends at Beer Bev. The CAD drawing of how the brewery lays out. I won't go too deep into it, but what I did want to say is sense of time. A question that's come up a lot is, your timeline's really long. Like, what are you guys doing? I'm like, well, here's the deal. We're engineering what will ultimately be a 1 million barrel facility with maybe 300,000 barrels of capacity day one. That's not much more than what we produce at Bend today. So there's like absolutely complex process engineering that goes with this, which we've started, and our aim is to break ground early 2019, start commissioning and flavor matching, a complex thing. Getting beer in Bend to taste like beer in Roanoke it sounds like it might be easy. It is not easy. And then the idea is that we're selling beer made here in Roanoke January 2021 or thereabouts. So, and with that, since no one stopped me along the way, and it appears that we have 5 minutes and 23 seconds, I would love to take questions, and it can run the gamut. This could be about community effort, it could be about ESOP, it could be about beer. Yes, Rebecca.
Are you going to ask local artists in Roanoke to design beer labels like you had to do in Bend?
So the question was, are we going to ask local artists here in Roanoke to design beer labels like we do in Bend? And the answer is yes, definitely. And in fact, that can start now. We don't need to wait until 2021. We should start that now. So, sure.
I'm curious about what you guys are doing or your plan for how to collaborate with the breweries that already exist here.
Ooh, I'm so glad you're asking me that. All right, I'm really stoked you're asking me that. So the question is, what our plan is to collaborate with breweries here. And actually, we just finished up working out 5 collaborations where we're going to bring brewers from the Roanoke Valley area to Bend to come brew with us, and then we're going to vice versa do something similar here. So we're super, super stoked about that. I mean, collaboration and learning from each other, I think, is at the very, very core and essence of what craft brewing is. So that's of critical importance to us. We always learn a lot doing it, and I think that is a kind of two-way flow of knowledge. Sure.
I know a lot of people are excited because of job opportunities, and I know a concern in Roanoke is specific areas of our city not having access to jobs. So does Deschutes do any intentional outreach to those communities to get those folks to have jobs?
Sure. So the question is, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but there's variable unemployment in different kind of geographic sectors of the city, and would we do any outreach to maybe areas where unemployment is higher to help fulfill jobs or fill jobs at the brewery? And the answer there is yes, we will. We've not engaged in any real hiring or recruitment efforts yet, but that would be the objective. We're also creating programs that are going to help, and we would like to partner with local academic institutions like Virginia Tech, which we already have a pretty good running dialogue with, which is super exciting. Fermentation Sciences program is awesome. But also with Western Virginia Community College. and trying to figure out different skill sets because it runs the spectrum. We go for all the way from really advanced automation, really advanced chemistry for brewing, to production that requires a fair amount of science and math, but maybe not all the way to a bachelor or master's degree, where an associate's degree or some level of community college can fulfill that. So the labor opportunities run the spectrum. And I will say on that, anyone that joins, obviously we're an ESOP, so they're going to participate after working with us for a year and putting in 1,000 hours or more. They become part of that employee stock ownership plan. And we also do a fairly generous 401k match, healthcare, free beer, and some other pretty cool benefits. So, sure. So are there any plans for a downtown presence like a public house? And without, throwing all my cards on the table here, that's something we are contemplating very seriously. A tasting room is something that we're really diligently discussing right now. Future plans for a public house, our effort, creating pubs is really, really hard work. It takes a ton of time to do it the right way, and we're not going to do it if we can't do it the right way. I would say tasting room is probably going to precede a pub, and we need to focus on the production facility before we shift our attention to a pub. Sure.
What are your specific sustainability goals with respect to development of the site?
So what are our specific sustainability goals with respect to development in the site and how we build? We have not set those yet because we've not started the actual architectural engineering part. We're only on process engineering, which is like how beer and liquid and things flow. But we'd contemplated LEED standards. We've contemplated use of local materials. So as soon as we have those set, we will very publicly share that. And we will make that core of how we site develop because Bend has been really entrepreneurial outgrowth, kind of a mishmash, and where we've taken a lot of effort to do things like have highly thermodynamically efficient brew houses where we do things like recapture flue gas to preheat incoming water, or utilize all of our spent grain to feed to cows and other agriculture around, utilize hops as fertilizer. We do a lot of different things that focus on reuse and energy sustainability and reduction of sustainability, reduction of energy usage, reduction of water usage. We have some pretty aggressive goals actually to come down by a half a barrel of water per barrel of beer brewed, which is huge in our industry. But as it pertains to site specifically, we haven't said it yet.
Well, there's an awesome company in Roanoke that can help you called Better Brewing Works.
Awesome. Please come talk to me after this so I can record that and not sit up here and forget. Thank you. Sure, Ian. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm a Civic League president in Southeast Roanoke, and we have some of the most economically depressed neighborhoods in the city over there. And I'd like to know what we can do to help prepare possible workers coming from the community before you start hiring.
So that's a great question. So the question is, did you say Southeast?
Yes.
In Southeast Roanoke, what the community could do to help start preparing workers. And I would say, as the discourse between us, other industry, and the different academic institutions, be that Western Virginia Community College or others, as there starts to be a discourse around brewing programs and around welding and all these different trades that are really, really important for a manufacturer of our type, I would just ask that you contemplate supporting those. Because I think there are tremendous efforts that are in the works now, but they're going to need support to develop programs specifically for brewing. Sure. So, pardon me, this is like straight up interrogation right there, that light, the way it's positioned. So the question is, what, if anything, does a partnership with the Greenway look like? I'm not sure yet, but that's something we'd be super open to discussing, how we could be part of it. Sure. I'm going to step out of the light there.
I was very impressed to hear you describe the way co-owners are elected and delegate charitable contributions.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if, with the formation of the new part of Deschutes here in Roanoke, if there would be a comparable board comprised of members here. I understand that in the Pacific Northwest, they may be very familiar with not-for-profit organizations that are worthy out there, but I would love to see
That is exactly what we would do. So the idea is the way that we function from a decision-making and internal governance standpoint and the way that we have community involvement in Bend, we would do the same model in Roanoke. And that also applies not just to community giving, but involvement in strategic planning, which is decision-making for the company as a whole. I didn't even mention our ESOP committee, but that goes well out of the scope. But ESOP committee will have representation for all those core committees that are part of our governance and part of our decision-making and forging our culture. We'll have representation from Roanoke. And a lot of them will actually be standalone here in Roanoke as well. Because I think what's important to us, and we've given this a lot of thought, is that core tenets of the culture transfer, basically our core values. But each site, I mean, it's true between Bend and Portland, very much has its own flavor. And we want that kind of diversity of character and culture that comes with geography, with differences in geography. We very much want that. So we'll probably have a separate culture club here in Roanoke to help form the culture and define it. Thank you so much.